right. Thanks for joining us at the GI Resistance Working Group of Veterans for Peace and Courage to Resist. We are honored to have our special guest, Alan Kennedy, who is a National Guard captain in the U.S. Army. And we're talking to, we'll let Alan tell a story. But first, I want to make sure that everybody knows that Alan is joining us today on his personal behalf and is not representing the U.S. Army, Department of Defense, or any other entity. And the views he is expressing today are entirely his own. Just to make sure that everybody's clear on that. And we actually do not want to get Alan in trouble if we can avoid it, any more so than he already is. Alan, thanks for coming, for being with us today.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Honored to be in this company.
So, Alan, I guess you got in not trouble, but you had a difference of opinion of some sorts with the U.S. Army. My understanding is that you attended a Black Lives Matter event that was entirely lawful and peaceful. And I guess my understanding is that the police were rough with the individuals, or caused some kerfuffle, some scuffle, some brouhaha ensued, and that the military tried to interpret that as an occasion of violence, a violent protest, and try to hold you account for, I guess, the police violence that happened. Is that generally true, or why don't you go ahead and tell me what actually happened?
It is. So I was when I lived in Denver, a few blocks from the Capitol in downtown, during the Black Lives Matter protests in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. I joined thousands of others in peaceful marches. One of those marches started at the Capitol, walked down Colfax, one of the big boulevards. The police actually cleared the way down the boulevard. And then the march eventually turned left. And at that point, the police lined up in riot gear and, without notice or provocation, fired clouds of tear gas fairly indiscriminately at the crowd, dispersing the crowd that was engaged in lawful, nonviolent public protest. I was not on orders, not on duty, and not in uniform. Appeared in my own capacity. At the time, I was serving part-time in the National Guard, not on that weekend. And then since then, I have transferred to the U.S. Army Reserve. So I'm still a captain in the Army, but now in the Reserve side. So I was very upset about the police response, which violated the Denver Police's own use of force policy, in addition to the constitutional rights of the marchers, which was widely documented. And in fact, Denver Police was sued 6 ways from Sunday, and there was just a jury verdict for, I think, $13 or $14 million against the Denver Police Department for an ACLU case on behalf of some of the protesters who were egregiously injured by the police. In my case, I was not injured, other than the inconvenience of tear gas, which I had experienced before, because we had to go through that in basic training. So, it's quite painful, but it's an experience that no one wants to go through. So I wrote about that in an op-ed in the Denver Post that was published a few days after that march. And that same day, the Colorado National Guard launched an investigation into my op-ed and participation in the protest the only reason they knew about my participation in the protest and the only proof they had that I was even there was my own op-ed in the Denver Post. And so that snowballed that snowballed into the Chief of Staff, Colonel Charles Beatty, ordering my commander, Major Sandrock, to issue a local reprimand, which he did. And then they started a second investigation. And then that second investigation turned into the commanding general of the Colorado Army National Guard, General Douglas Paul, Brigadier General Douglas Paul, issued a general officer memorandum of reprimand to Gomar, which is generally a career killer for anyone in the military. And he did that in that fall, solely based on my participation in peaceful protest and op-eds about it. So going straight after my constitutional rights, the crux of it was that there is a Department of Defense instruction, DOTI 1325.06, enclosure 3, paragraph 6D, prohibits participation in off-post demonstrations where, quote, violence is likely to result. The other provisions clearly didn't apply protest while on duty or in uniform or in a foreign country or in breach of law and order. Those clearly didn't apply. The only provision at issue was violence is likely to result. And the general said that Black Lives Matter protests are, quote, inherently violent. And his chief of staff said that Black Lives Matter protests, quote, begin peacefully and devolve into violent clashes with the police. And they said that because the police tear gassed me along with thousands of others, because the police used violence against us, therefore violence resulted, and therefore violence must have been likely to result by virtue only of the police violence against us. Fortunately, with the help of Attorney James Branham and some other believers in constitutional rights, we sued my entire chain of command, and since then the Army has overturned the Gomar and negative evaluations. They issued 2 negative evaluations, including a referred OER against me, in addition to the Gomar and the local reprimand. So they just kept piling on investigation after investigation and reprimand after reprimand and negative evaluation after negative evaluation to destroy my career. And so we're hoping that the judge will deny the military's motions to dismiss. They're now arguing that the case is moot. We're arguing that the regulation is still in place, so it's not moot. That this is still a threat to the constitutional rights of service members all over the country, and more fundamentally, that service members have constitutional rights. You don't sacrifice your constitutional rights when you take an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States.
Wow, thanks, Alan. James, I was wondering if you could jump in here. As far as like when I guess Alan was pushing back against the U.S. Army, you stepped in and gave him a hand. Can you tell us about more of this case?
Yeah, just a little bit. And I should mention that we have several other attorneys involved in the case as well. So I want to give credit where credit is due. My role has been largely because I mostly work as civilian defense counsel in the context of military courts-martial. My experience is mostly in the military system, not civil litigation. So Alan has a whole team of attorneys that we're working together, and we each have our own areas. And mine is really looking at the military procedures themselves and looking at the ramifications of this. One of the things we're really focusing on in this litigation is not just the present case with Captain Kennedy. It's much bigger than that, because the problem is this regulation is used and abused all of the time. One of the challenging dynamics, and what makes Captain Kennedy's case somewhat unique, is the military actually did something substantial on paper that we could then point to and bring litigation about. What's more common is that a service member who's thinking about participating in a protest, and I've heard this from multiple enlisted personnel during, especially when there were many Black Lives Matter protests happening last year, they were told, sometimes they were told in formation, sometimes they were told informally, that it would not be a good idea to go to the protest. And they were often warned about this military extremism regulation, the one that Captain Kennedy's referring to. And the problem is, because that regulation is so vague, it can be interpreted by many commanders and NCOs however they want it to be. And so some service members were told, yes, you can protest, but just don't break the law. Don't be violent, but follow the rules, you're fine. Other service members are told, absolutely do not be at a protest at all. And the problem is this level of inconsistency is a real problem. And what it really does is it stifles free speech. And for a lot of the folks I've worked with, again, many of them enlisted younger service members, this is really their first, and for many of them, it's the first time they've wanted to be engaged in activism at all. This is such a new, precious thing, frankly. It's the kind of thing that healthy democracies encourage young adults when they're saying, I'm seeing injustice, I want to do something about it. The problem is our system right now is trying to say, no, don't participate in our democracy, don't speak up. And that is unacceptable. It's unconstitutional. It's clearly wrong. The military, by the way, I'll mention the military's argument historically on these free speech issues has been to say that, yes, theoretically, service members have certain protected constitutional rights, but they always start using the military exceptions. And constitutionally, the idea is the Constitution gives the military certain powers to conduct war. There's powers that are given both on the executive branch side and the congressional side. And so it's the courts have traditionally interpreted these provisions as saying that because the military has the power to do these things, therefore other rights, other implications are often subordinated or pushed or even not respected because of the unique context service members are in. And some of these provisions arguably might make sense in certain contexts, such as service members are prohibited from engaging in protest in foreign countries. There's a very practical reason to prevent international incidents. There is a rational connection to military service. Protesting in uniform, again, I think there is a rational connection to military service. But what a service member does when they're off duty here in the United States, there's no reason for this. And the problem is, again, because this regulation is worded so vaguely, it's an open door for abuse. Alan, could you maybe kind of along these same lines, could you talk through a little bit more as far as the bigger picture, as far as why was this something was worth fighting for you? I mean, I'm sure personally, as far as you've made a part of your career serving in a reserve context in the military, but I think it's bigger than that. Could you explain what motivated you to actually bring a lawsuit or to sue your boss?
Yeah, this goes far bigger than simply my military career. I mean, I do have some things I stand to lose if we're not successful, but that pales in comparison to the victims of systemic racism, and that motivated me to protest and not just protest that one time, but I have grown up in a family where the peaceful protest is simply part of what we do. When I was a young child, my mom took us to the gay pride parades in New York City. I'm originally from Brooklyn. Stonewall 25, for example. I've got the pin from being that. I wasn't even old enough at the time to wear a pin, but I think that's what this is about. That if they can say that the police violence against protesters in this case retroactively means that you shouldn't have been there, then no kind of peaceful protest is safe. And that would take millions of people's constitutional rights to protest away, because the Black Lives Matter movement is built around peaceful protests. Other social movements have been built around peaceful protests. The right to protest in the streets is one of the things that creates change. It draws attention to societal injustices, and protesting racism is making a difference. We've seen that it has already led to changes in laws in some states, attempts at changing federal law, although we're stymied there, and to some extent, some accountability of police departments, mainly when they have to settle cases in court or lose ultimately in court. And that's what this is. That's the value here. It's related to why I write op-eds, to be able to try to hold officials, to hold our elected officials, but also the unelected officials, such as the generals and colonels who are involved in this, accountable for violating people's constitutional rights. I think I'm privileged in a way that I can afford to, could stand up and say, let's sue them. This really matters. And so I think my case is symbolic of rights of service members that don't often get their day in court. And that for 50 years, the military is citing cases from the Vietnam War era, from 50 years ago. They're citing cases from 50 years ago to say that in wartime, soldiers and other service members lose their constitutional rights. And I think that's wrong. I think that we should have the right to protest, whether it's in the streets, holding a sign, marching down the boulevard, or whether it's writing an op-ed to highlight the hypocrisy of a general who says that Black Lives Matter protests are inherently violent. I mean, the fact that the general believes that is indicative of systemic racism. It really bears out that I was there for the right reason in the first place. And that's what we're up against. If service members don't stand up for their rights, then those in charge are just going to keep violating our rights and keep silencing us over and over and over again.
Well, thanks, Alan. It kind of, you took me back when I was active duty Marine Corps, and I went out to a gay rights march. This was back in the time. Oh, don't ask, don't tell was the day. And it's like I was out there because some friends of mine wanted to go, some civilian friends, and I just thought it made sense that gay people are also human beings and they should have the same rights. But I was also kind of scared to death that anybody in my command would find out, and I had no idea whether what I was doing was right or wrong or legal or not. But I also just assumed that I'd be in deep trouble if my command found out, right? Even if it was legal and even if I had the right to do it, my command was very clear that just because something's legal doesn't mean I can do it. I remember I had a question of authority sticker on inside my locker. Nobody could see it unless the locker is open. but I got I got in trouble for that because anti-authority or whatever. So I guess thank you, for your courage to do that and to stand up. I guess
my advantage is that I'm a by branch by rank I'm a captain, but by branch training I'm a judge advocate. So I'm their lawyer. My job is to know the regulations. My job is to know the interplay of the constitutional and administrative law requirements. And if I don't stand up for free speech, who can?
right. Well, that brings up a question I've never answered for myself adequately: is are JAGs actual lawyers or are they pretend lawyers? Help me out.
JAGs actually are required to be lawyers. So you're required to be licensed by a state in order to be certified by the Judge Advocate General as a JAG. So I am required to, and I am licensed in 5 state level jurisdictions and some of the federal courts up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So that was the other advantage I had here, where I was one of my own lawyers until that became untenable, and I had a sufficient team of lawyers representing me to take it from there. But I spent almost 5 years out of my. I've now spent 10 years in the Army. I enlisted May 8th, 2012. And so I spent almost 5 years on trial defense representing soldiers accused by the command of a variety of things and under a variety of potential punishments. One of the other interesting things about my case is that the Army they did investigations, reprimands, negative evaluations, but never took it to a court martial. And I think that's because that would have triggered a whole host of due process rights within the military that the military didn't want opened up. They didn't want to open that can of worms. And so they went the administrative route, and then our only remedy after filing a host of appeals to the highest level was to take it to federal court.
That brings up a really good thing, what Alan just shared, and that is one of the challenges with this area of law is that we have almost zero case law in the modern era. Because to get case law, you need someone to be prosecuted. You either need a lawsuit, which they're rare, but that's what Alan is doing, or you need someone who's been prosecuted under a law who then appeals it. The problem is that very, very few people get prosecuted for this. Extremely rare. Now, a significant, not even, I'd say a small number get administratively separated on these grounds. I do know of cases of administrative separations, but even those are fairly rare. And because most people, by the time they've been beat up by the system, certainly they can go to BCMR, Board of Correction and Military Records. There are some other avenues post-discharge, but absent something like that, the chance of any case law being generated is so slim. And so that's one of the frustrating things is the military, they've created this system, they've created this regulation that is vague and I think unconstitutionally vague. They threaten with it a lot. They threaten court martials. They threaten many other things. But unfortunately, unfortunately, the good news is they're not prosecuting very many people. The bad news is because they're not, nothing gets appealed. And therefore, some of the bad case law that's out there doesn't get turned over. And that's a real problem.
Can I pop in just with a little history?
Sure.
Okay, in the fall of 1971.
So, Andy, you want to introduce yourself first?
Andy Berman served in the Army during the towards the end of the Vietnam War, 71 to 73. Was a resistor, got into some trouble, had some wonderful lawyers in Germany that helped me avoid court-martial. Basically, we were passing out anti-war literature, passing out petitions to impeach Nixon. But I want to talk about the demonstration that I participated in at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in the USA, out of uniform. I would say there were 25 people there, half of them GIs, half of them live supporters. We were carrying banners. GIs are not scabs or riot cops. At some point, GIs were being sent. Well, GIs were threatened to be sent to Chicago during the '68 convention, and I guess there were other instances. End racism in the military, and join the GI Union. Totally peaceful, fair amount of publicity, and no one got into any trouble specifically for that. I'm sure records were kept, and later on, people got into trouble, but for that, nothing.
Well, what's interesting is actually one thing I was curious when those protests happened in those days, Fort Bragg, was it a closed post or is it pretty much wide open? People could come and go on and off the post.
Oh, you had to stop at the gates.
You did? Okay. Yeah, I mean, from a legal standpoint, that's what's interesting is that under the current law, under the current regulations, that would be completely out of bounds because it happened on post.
No, it didn't. It was in the city. It was in.
Oh, it was in the city. Okay.
It was in Fayetteville.
In Fayetteville. Okay.
Probably 5 blocks from the post.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I think one of the aspects that my case has brought up is we haven't been able to find a case, and the military hasn't cited a case where the specific regulation that was applied to me has been considered by the court whether it's constitutional or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes to the fact that this regulation in general rarely makes it to court. That many people's careers have been destroyed by the military, but very few make it to court where they could establish precedent or overturn the regulation itself. So that's our point, that we want the regulation struck down instead of remaining on the books even after they pull out each of the bad pieces of paper. From my file, one by one, it seems like they take another bad piece of paper out of my file every time they have a deadline in court. And so that doesn't undo the constitutional part.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Alan, can you tell us about, I guess, what do you see as your career going forward, in the U.S. Army? One part is, you're here today talking to us on the Courage to GI Resistance Support meeting. So that's not going to be a great thing for your file. But I don't know. How do you see your role going forward? What? Because this case really is about your future career, right?
We actually don't know what's in my file, but hopefully we'll get there.
That's an issue in the case.
If I might, I don't know if you can see this. Here's the picture of that demonstration in Fort Bragg.
Oh, wow. Jeff, is there any way we can make that Andy's thing bigger?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Oh, wow.
I have a good a JPEG of it I could send.
Oh, you should definitely send that to Jeff. That would be awesome.
Yeah, send that to me, and I'll put it in the final video. So, Alan, I was talking what my question was, what happens next? You got this case coming up. What's that going to mean for you personally, or your career? What do you hope happens going forward?
Yeah, so I think I'm somewhat unusual in the sense that I'm a career reservist. I've always been in the National Guard, and then just in December, my transfer went through to the U.S. Army Reserve, which was in part because the Colorado National Guard never stopped retaliating against me, and I needed to get out of that hostile and very toxic environment. And so I think there was a point where in 2020 where they just kept punishing me, and it was quite depressing. That there was a point where I was hit pretty hard with that, because it just seemed like every week they were doing an investigation or a reprimand or some kind of negative evaluation, all the way until we and then we filed suit and started fighting back, started resisting, really, and with the federal lawsuit, and then we've had incremental success ever since, and one piece of bad paper being taken out of my file every few months, one wrong decision by the generals and the colonels being overturned by some Army appeal board that we'd never heard of, every few months, and then meanwhile, that's not my full-time job. I think that's the other part of this. Is unfortunate to have I think a thriving civilian career. I only get paid by the Army 2 days a month. The other 28 days, I'm now a lecturer of public policy at William and Mary. So I'm fortunate enough to teach law and public policy at the master's and undergraduate level, and I love my job. I have an 18-month-old daughter. And we are, I think, thriving in Williamsburg, Virginia at this point. That said, I want to continue to serve. And I've made it 10 years so far. I'd like to make it another 10. But that hinges on getting promoted. It's up or out at this point. So if I have to get promoted to major, or I will. Or I'll get, or I'll be discharged from the Army. So that's where we are on the military side. It's interesting that I'm a JAG, so I think I have a much better view at this point of constitutional rights of soldiers and administrative law than most other JAGs ever get this kind of experience. So, but I would like to, continue to serve. I do also, want to have the opportunity to speak up when I need to. I was asked by the New York Times to participate in a video in 2019 after I came back from the Middle East and spoke up against Trump's unilateral decision to withdraw from Syria right after I was in Syria. I thought that in general, getting out of endless wars is a good thing. But if you're abandoning your allies to genocide, that's a bad thing. And so I joined I think there are, I guess, in my view, there are times when we need to stand up and fight against genocide. We need to protect people around the world. We need to protect people's rights. But we also need to make sure that we're not violating people's constitutional rights in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And probably to stop getting into endless wars. The war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan needed to end. In fact, we shouldn't have been in Iraq from the beginning. And, one of the things that my case highlights is not only the right to protest racism, but also, I participated in an anti-war protest against going into Iraq back in, I don't know, 2002, 2003, against the Bush administration's push for war. And by their assertion that I should be held accountable for the violence inflicted on me by the police, that could be any protest. I'm not responsible for the violence by the police because the government will always try to tamp down protests. The government will always try to silence protesters. It's disappointing, but that's not the fault of the protester. That's a sign that we need to protest even more.
Alan, I just want to say thank you for being with us today. I worked in support of a U.S. JAG reservist, David Coombs, during his defense of WikiLeaks whistleblower Chelsea Manning for many months at Fort Meade in the shadow of the NSA. So I saw what somebody can do standing up to the U.S. Army from as still having a reservist role as a JAG. So I guess I was just kidding. You guys really, some of you guys are really actually good lawyers. Having said that, a lot of JAGs are not great lawyers, and I hope they watch this webinar and are inspired by your example. Mr. Novelty.
Instead of taking the view that they're there to rubber stamp the decision of the commander or to provide a legal justification for the commander, they need to really take their job seriously and think about, is what the commander is doing constitutional? Is it legal? Is it morally right? We need to think about all of those things for every single decision by a commander in the military. That's really what a JAG should do. Unfortunately, my experience, many JAGs have ratified the decisions of the people who punished me. And that means that every one of those Army lawyers at the Colorado National Guard level, the National Guard Bureau level, the Department of the Army level, the Department of Defense level, JAGs at every single level failed to do their job, in my case. Every single level, commanders failed to do their job and JAGs failed to do their job.
That's a really important point, because one thing to look at is the legal ethics rules make it clear that lawyers are not just to give opinions about the law. Rather, they are to discuss the ethical implications, the moral implications. That's part of our DNA. That's in the ethical guidelines. In fact, in old days, you'd often hear lawyers referred to as counselors at law, because we are supposed to deal with the big issues. And so if military lawyers aren't doing that, it really creates a lot of opportunities for abuse. Maria, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to chime in and just say, in my experience, what I've noticed with a lot of JAGs is that they, especially in CO cases and conscientious objection cases specifically, they must, in other cases, get so complacent with practicing lazy law that they do that in a CO case, and they just think it's going to be rubber stamped all the way through, and so for us, we've had, consistent success in the rebuttal phase, turning around a bad investigating officer opinion because they were phoning it in, because that's kind of what they do in other parts of their, legal practice in that context. So I'm glad to know you're out there, Alan, teaching. Are you teaching other JAGs, other military attorneys?
The Army has not asked me to do that. but I do teach on the civilian side. I'm teaching public policy to undergraduates and masters of public policy students at William and Mary, and then the Army has asked me to teach cadets in the ROTC program at William and Mary, who will be future officers. So that is exciting.
That's wonderful.
I've also been on, just found out yesterday, I will also be teaching a course in my civilian hat to captains and majors who are funded by the Army to take to do an MBA at William and Mary. So I'll be teaching them a class on military law and policy this summer. So that should be very interesting because these are people who do a very competitive selection process to be paid by the Army to do an MBA. I, of course, will have full academic freedom because I'll be doing it in my civilian capacity, not on my drill weekend. And I take that pretty seriously. So we'll be looking at all kinds of issues relating to military law and policy, ranging from free speech, the Black Lives Matter protests, but also to ongoing issues such as the military's persistent problem with sexual assault, to looking at bigger picture issues of the wars in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. Now we're getting more complicated with Ukraine, our involvement in Ukraine, to looking at the military-industrial complex, a whole range of issues that I think military officers need to think about, and maybe we can start to inspire Army officers to care more about constitutional rights and pay more attention to the rights of service members, and as well as the people in the countries where we are. That's really important too.
I just want to say one more quick thing. Yeah, that you're absolutely right, Alan. I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the problems with JAGS is a similar one that military doctors face, and that is that you have that split loyalty, right? If you're a civilian attorney, you have an obligation to provide good counsel to your client, and that's your primary obligation. As a doctor, your primary obligation is to the well-being, do no harm to your patient. In the military, though, I think people feel that pinch. They feel that conflict and that compromise, and I think that ends up in causing harm. So thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, it's difficult because you get rated you get these annual evaluations that go toward that are the guiding factor for promotions. If you're being evaluated and rated by somebody who then you're supposed to advise and say no to, most JAGs won't. And so most of the time,
Alan's locked up on my end. Are other folks able to hear him?
Alan's fine over here.
Okay. He was on my end. Sorry.
Most of the time, commanders never there's no one around them to say no. And that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
All right, Alan. Thank you very much for joining us today. I absolutely appreciate it. And we're going to spend a few minutes covering a few other things. Hope if you can stay with us, that's awesome. But appreciate your time today.
Obviously, everything I've said is my own views. I think it's pretty clear that it's not endorsed by the Army since we're in federal court. The case is Kennedy v. Paul. It's in the United States District Court for the District of Colorado. If you're interested, show your support by supporting Courage to Resist and my attorney James Branham, who I highly recommend.
Thank you, Alan. And we have a special guest, Kyle Toon. Kyle, thank you for being on with us today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Maybe introduce yourself and tell us about some news you heard very recently that we're all excited by.
Yeah, right on. I can do that. My name is Kyle Toon. I've born and raised in Southern Maryland. Joined the military 2010 at the age of 18. Went in the Army as a human intelligence collector, and that is the job that I've been performing these last 10 years, these last 12 years. I was able to attain the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 2, and I submitted for conscience objection discharge on, I believe, my memory serves me correctly, I started it in February of 2021. And so, and now I just found out May 6th of this month that the Conscience Objection Review Board unanimously decide that my beliefs, my moral and ethical beliefs, are just, they're firm, they're sincere, and that the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army has approved my my discharge from the Army. And so finding that out after a year and 4 months of going through this process is quite a relief.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Kyle. Yeah, earlier in the car, Maria from the Center of Conscience and War, Bill Galvin. I believe they helped you, right? A bit.
Yeah,
And,
they did.
I want to give them a shout out. Their amazing work. And we are going to have you for our June meeting and talk more about your story. But it's just exciting that we're able to hear within a couple days of this great news that you have, Kyle. So congratulations. And we hope to see you in June for our next meeting.
Yeah, right on. I can't wait.
All right. Thank you, brother. I wanted to remind folks, Daniel Hale, whistleblower, drone whistleblower. He is featured in the award-winning documentary National Bird. He is serving 45 months in federal prison for sharing details of the U.S. Super secret execution assassination drone program that's happening. I wanted to, last night, supporters of Daniel had a virtual letter writing party, and our colleague Stephanie Atkinson was with them, and hopefully she'll be able to tell us a few things about what happened last night and maybe Daniel's case overall.
Yeah, I went to the meeting and it was essentially his team talking about what we can do to support him. It's been 1 year since he's been in the communications management unit at the federal penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. He is, all of his communications get surveilled on the way out, which is a really important part. They're less concerned about what he's getting and what he's receiving than they are about what he is saying on the way, on his correspondence going outward. There's a lot of conflicting information about whether he even gets the mail that's sent to him. Quite a few people said that they sent correspondence and it was returned to them for whatever reason. Some of the reasons are that if your signature does not match who you are on a legal document, like a passport or a driver's license, you want to make sure that it's very specific, no use of nicknames. He can receive photographs that are printed on photographic paper, like a 3x5 or 4x6 photograph. This is really one of the biggest things that he's looking for in correspondence is just day-to-day life stuff. What's going on in your world? Tell him about the outside. Tell him about spring. Tell him how many miles you took your dog for a walk today. He's just wanting that real human over the fence kind of correspondence that if we were neighbors. He cannot receive books or magazines anymore. He had such an amazing response from that early part of the campaign that he's inundated with materials, and at any time they can be repossessed. So he has more than enough of this material right now. His expected release date is July of 2024. See, no books or magazines. Do you guys have any questions for me? Great. One of the things is in writing correspondence, we suggest that you number your pages. Use one side of the piece of paper only. Use blue or black ink. Day and date of the correspondence on each page, as well as his name and his OP number. And your full legal name and your registered address. Nothing from a PO box. That's all I have for you today.
Stephanie, I was wondering, would there be, if I wrote him as an attorney, would normally in some prisons that's a little bit easier to write, but do you know if that's the case or not there? Have you heard anything?
It's terribly arbitrary. That's what we're getting. Okay. There were probably about, I'm going to say 30 people on this call last night. And the thing that we touch base most on is trying to figure out why some things were rejected, why some things were accepted. And it's very arbitrary. Like, I recently wrote him a letter asking him if he would give us a statement to be read on his behalf at the Veterans for Peace National Convention. That's a no-go. He probably cannot write anything that goes to anything that would be a third-party correspondence is discouraged. It's got to be person to person. So you probably get more success if you're writing to him as James Branham rather than James Branham attorney.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah. They're very mercurial in their temperament in Southern Illinois. How do I know? Because I grew up there. Hey. And don't ever want to go back. Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. So, just think about making your correspondence, numbering each page, addressing each page, because, they might simply not deliver him the whole letter or only the first page. So everything is very iffy. And I think his team is really trying to keep things simple because it's so, because the CMU, the communications management unit is looking at every little thing. They're looking for anything to deny him whatever, the simplest pleasures. Okay.
So on the web, the Stand with Daniel Hale website, does that have this detailed information about how to write him and whatnot?
It does. It does.
Okay, good.
If you can think about simply using a blank sheet of paper, white paper, blue or black ink, and being very specific about the way you address the correspondence. It's the little details, right? It's the devil's always in the details, especially with any sort of institution like this, where they're looking for the smallest thing to not do the right thing. So that's what I have. And if you go to his page, the standwithdanielhale.org, you can get some more specifics. So that's what's going on.
Okay. Well, I think we'll work on Rena and I will try to maybe put together a letter writing party here in Oklahoma. So,
thank you.
Thanks, Steph. And again, standwithdanielhale.org. It's on the screen now, as well as his address to write Daniel. He's got at least another year and a half in federal prison, and we appreciate his contributions. So this weekend is International Conscientious Objector Day on Sunday, May 15th. I just want to make sure people are aware of that. Around the world, people will be gathering to celebrate conscientious objection. And of course, the definition of conscientious objection kind of varies from country to country, government entity to government entity. But here in the San Francisco Bay Area, friends are gathering in Berkeley for the 16th consecutive year. The City of Berkeley Peace and Justice Commission is sponsoring our raising of a peace flag over Berkeley City Hall. We're having it on Monday because Sunday is a terrible day in that spot, and we'll have the more city participation on Monday. So if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, join us in Berkeley City Hall at 11:30 a.m. This coming Monday morning. Veterans speak out from war resistors from the Vietnam War to current. We'll have a sing-along as we do every year. And also this year, we are remembering Bob Miola, a comrade who died recently, who was the main organizer of this event. So that's the 16th annual Berkeley Conscientious Objector and War Resistor Day. And we usually have a pretty good crowd and enjoy the company. And then afterwards, we are going to have lunch at a local Indian restaurant that Bob liked, and pretty good food, vegan Indian. Courage to Resist is also looking for a new podcaster. We've done an amazing, nearly 100 episodes so far, but Matt Breams, our amazing podcaster, is moving on to a more than full-time job, and we are trying to fill his shoes. That's going to be very hard, but we're going to see what we're going to do. We're actually doing a few less podcasts because we're doing this monthly webinar as well. So if you're interested in being a Courage Resist podcaster, send me an email, jeff@courageresist.org. We actually pay for this gig. We pay $150 per episode, and it usually takes 4 to 6 hours to get it done. So, and that is our webinar for today. If anybody has any questions, we can have a chat from here on out. But thank you. And we'll see you next month, June, the second Wednesday of the month, 11:30 Pacific. Let me show you, 2 p.m. Pacific.
Okay,
whatever time it is Eastern. And yeah, let's open up for questions and have a chat before we go to our business meeting. Thank you.
Okay. I've been involved of late in a project that's very relevant to the topic that we discussed today, lawyers, and in particular, progressive lawyers. And the history is this. During the Vietnam War, there were progressive, you probably know this, progressive lawyers projects in cities around the world where there were American bases. In particular, there was a lawyer's office in Saigon, in the Philippines, in West Germany, in Japan, in Okinawa, and I missed one other place. And lawyers went there, progressive lawyers went there. They were funded by some wealthy institute, and they gave free advice and free defense of American soldiers in trouble with the army. Typically, as you probably can imagine, the trouble at that time somehow was linked to the war, opposition to the war. So the book has been written. It's been contributed by about 15 lawyers. Unfortunately, they're having trouble. You know, this is stuff that happened many, many years ago, over 50 years ago. Many of the authors have been passing, and there has been trouble trying to find a publisher. But they did self-publish And this is what the self-published version looks like.
Oh, wow.
They only have 100 copies. They're using it to approach publishers to, to get them to publish. They've been having some difficulty. I pointed them to a contact through a friend at Monthly Review Press. It was turned down. Monthly Review Press says we do theoretical stuff, academic stuff. We don't do history. Whatever. They've been having trouble. So if anyone has any needs on publishers that might be interested in this book, the person who is kind of in charge is someone you might know. He was one of the lead lawyers for the Presidio 27. His name is Howard DeNike. And he is looking for lawyers, not looking for lawyers, looking for publishers. So if you have any needs, please contact Howard DeNike. Vietnam War.
Thank you so much. I will email him right after this.
I'm sure you recognize some of the authors. They were lawyers mostly.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Well, that's great.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. And yeah, I'll be in touch with him. And also, I just frankly want to read it. But I think the MLTF might be very interested in working to try to help find a publisher, because this is a big part of as I understand it, from our early history. So,
right. Okay, very good.
Thanks, Andy.